Hi everyone, it's Nini. I'm reviewing Matthew Perry's book, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. Matthew battled addiction his entire life and lost his battle in October 2023 at the age of 54. He said, "When I die, I want helping others to be the first thing that's mentioned. Addiction is far too powerful for anyone to defeat alone. But together, one day at a time, we can beat it down." My goal is to help honor Matthew's desire to help others. I hope this helps another addict out there not feel so alone, or helps someone who has a loved one dealing with addiction have more insight into the disease.
There were 5 people put on an ECMO machine that night, and the other 4 died, and I survived. So the big question is, why? Why was I the one that survived? There has to be some kind of reason. And for those suffering out there, there is a reason. You know, the worst that can happen to somebody just gives you more tools to help somebody else.
In the interlude between chapters 3 and 4, Matthew writes about being in a rehab in Switzerland in 2020. He proposed to his girlfriend because he feared she'd leave him and he didn't want to be alone during COVID. He was also on 1,800 milligrams of hydrocodone when he proposed, and as he put it, high as a kite. He said the Switzerland rehab was very luxurious. There was a chef and a butler, but it also had easy access to pills. He'd lie about having stomach pain and easily be given the hydrocodone. He was taking 1,800 milligrams a day, and that's a very high dose. Matthew said this was mostly a maintenance dose, so he wouldn't go into withdrawal. In comparison, cancer patients are typically given 100 milligrams a day. He also talks about ketamine, and this was very hard to read because we now know that Matthew died from a ketamine overdose. He was being given infusions at this time at the rehab, and he said he wouldn't get a good high, just a loopy drunk kind of high. He writes, "It's used for 2 reasons, to ease pain and help with depression. Has my name written all over it. They might as well have called it Maddie." Ketamine felt like a giant exhale. They'd bring me into a room, sit me down, put headphones on me so I could listen to music, blindfold me, and put an IV in. I was on a ketamine drip for an hour. As I lay there in the pitch dark, I would disassociate, see things. I'd been in therapy for so long that I wasn't even freaked out by this. Oh, there's a horse over there? Fine, might as well be. As the music played and the K ran through me, it all became about the ego and the death of the ego. Oh, I thought, this is what happens when you die. Yet I would continually sign up for this shit because it was something different, and anything different is good. Taking K is like being hit in the head with a giant happy shovel, but the hangover was rough and outweighed the shovel. Ketamine was not for me. Matthew had to have surgery on his back, and he was given propofol, and notes that this was the drug that killed Michael Jackson. During surgery, Matthew's heart stopped for 5 minutes. He said they didn't want the guy from Friends to die on their table, so a beefy Swiss guy, as he called him, pounded on his chest. It saved Matthew's life, but also broke 8 of his ribs. Breaking 1 rib is super painful, so breaking 8 had to be horrible. Around this same time, Matthew talked with director Adam McKay about being in a movie called Don't Look Up. Matthew was given a role, and he said when they talked about it, he hadn't been Chandler, he had just been himself. But Matthew couldn't do the movie due to his broken ribs because he was in too much pain. But it made Matthew feel good that he could get a role like that as himself, not as Chandler Bing. He flew home to LA from Switzerland and took a private jet because he didn't want people to recognize him coming back from rehab. This flight cost him $175,000. He went to an LA doctor hoping to get another prescription for 1,800 milligrams of hydrocodone a day, but the doctor told him that was way too high and he'd be given 30 milligrams a day. So Matthew spent another $175,000 and took a private jet back to Switzerland so he could get 1,800 milligrams of hydrocodone a day. In chapter 4, Matthew writes about the start of Friends. When the cast came together for the first time, it felt like they'd been together in a previous life. He said for a long time he didn't want to talk about Friends because all anyone ever wanted to talk about was Friends, but he had done a lot of other good things too. But he knows now just how special Friends is to people, and he and the other cast members knew from the start too that they were part of something very, very special. Everyone was new to each other except Matthew had met Jennifer Aniston 3 years prior through mutual acquaintances. Matthew had been immediately attracted to her and asked her out, but Jennifer had turned him down and said she'd love to be friends with him. He notes the irony in his response when he told her, "We can't be friends." They were able to get past that, though, and focus on Friends because they both knew they had been given what Matthew described as the best job Hollywood had to offer. Director Jim Burrows really wanted the cast to bond and develop chemistry, so he encouraged they hang out all together off-set. The cast would get together and talk or play poker, and Matthew writes that right away there was electricity in the air. Matthew said he often cracked jokes with the others to try to get them to like him because of how funny he was. He writes, "Because why else would anybody like me?" It would take 15 years for him to learn that he didn't need to be a joke machine. When he drove home after working on Friends for the first day, he felt happy, and this was not an emotion Matthew was used to. He went to a bar named Formosa, which is how he usually spent his evenings, but noted that he drank far less that night than usual. Day 2 of Friends was the table read. They were still excited, but also scared because actors could still be fired if a table read sucked. That had actually happened to Lisa Kudrow, who played Phoebe. She had been cast as a part of Roz in Frasier, but then was fired during the table read. But Matthew writes that he knew Chandler. He was Chandler. He jokes that he even looked like Chandler. The table read went perfectly. No one made a mistake. Every joke landed. The 100 people watching the table read applauded when they finished. By the time they started rehearsals, everyone knew this was going to be huge and their lives were going to change. Matthew says they could smell money and fame. Matthew writes, "I was going to be so famous that all the pain I carried with me would melt like frost in sunlight, and any new threats would bounce off me as though this show was a force field I could cloak myself in." He felt like the attention he had wanted all his life would finally come his way. People were going to like him. He wasn't going to be too needy. He was going to be enough. He would matter. He wouldn't be that kid in the ballroom with his mother, desperately wanting her to turn and look at him. The creators of the show really encouraged everyone to use their creative juices and pitch jokes. They also wanted to know the cast members and incorporate some of their real lives into their characters. Matthew told them he was disastrous in relationships and he was not comfortable in silence, so he always filled that with a joke. They wrote that into Chandler Bing. They found out the show title was shortened from Friends Like Us to Friends. They also found out they would be getting the time slot between 2 huge shows, Mad About You and Seinfeld. They were getting great feedback from the network that this was going to be a hit. Before the show aired, Jim Burrows flew the cast to Las Vegas and gave them each $100 and told them to gamble and have fun and enjoy their anonymity, because after the show aired, they'd never have that again. Matthew wondered if fame would really fill all the holes in his life. Would giving up a normal life be worth it? He remembered the prayer he had made shortly before he got cast on Friends. "God, you can do whatever you want to me, just please make me famous." One part of that was about to come true, but he also knew that the other part of that was that God could do whatever he wanted to him. Matthew writes that during the summer before the show premiered, he flew to Massachusetts to visit his grandparent. He ran into Gwyneth Paltrow at a party. Neither of them were famous at this point, and they ended up making out in a broom closet. He also spent that summer on a cruise to Mexico. Matthew says he spent the cruise drunk and calling girls back in LA. Friends premiered on September 22nd, 1994. It ranked 17, which was very good for a new show, and most of the reviews praised it. It very quickly gained in popularity. It became a top 10 show, then a top 5, where it would stay for the next 10 years. Matthew said the show added pressure on him because if he said a line and it didn't get a laugh, it was devastating to him.
I felt like I was gonna die if they didn't laugh. It's not healthy, for sure. But I would sometimes say a line and they wouldn't laugh and I would sweat and just like go into convulsions.
If I didn't get the laugh I was supposed to get, I would freak out.
It would take you down.
Matthew writes that fame was there. He loved his co-stars, loved the show, but he was still struggling with his addictions. He had this secret that he was ashamed of. He couldn't go to Formosa anymore because he would be recognized, so he drank alone in his apartment. The illness was deepening, but he didn't recognize it. He said he worried if people saw how much he was drinking, they would ask him to stop, and stopping was impossible.
I didn't know how to stop. If the police came over to my house and said, if you drink tonight, we're going to take you to jail, I'd start packing for jail because I didn't know how to, I couldn't stop.
His friend Craig Bierko, who had turned down the role of Chandler, didn't speak to Matthew for 2 years. But they met up and Craig apologized, saying he couldn't handle that Matthew had gotten famous in a role that he had turned down. Matthew said, "You know what, Craig? It doesn't do what we all thought it would. It doesn't fix anything." Matthew writes that even though he was famous, he would change places with his less famous friends, or even the guy in the gas station down the block. He writes, "I'd change places with them in a minute and forever, if only I could not be who I am, the way I am, bound on this wheel of fire." In the interlude between chapters 4 and 5, Matthew writes that after being in the rehab in Switzerland, he found himself back in LA, engaged and living with his fiancée and her 2 dogs. Because he had been high on pain pills when he proposed, he didn't remember proposing. Matthew writes, "Needless to say, we broke up." That's where I'll end the video for today. I hope you come back for my next video as I continue reviewing this book. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.
The best thing about me, bar none, is if somebody comes up to me and says, "I can't stop drinking, can you help me?" I can say yes and follow up and do it. I've said this for a long time. When I die, I don't want friends to be the first thing that's mentioned. I want that to be the first thing that's mentioned. And I'm going to live the rest of my life proving that.